this next organization is one that I very much wanted to talk with. And I hope I pronounce it correctly. I'm sure she will correct me if I don't. Yachad. It's a British Jewish organization. On their website, it said their primary mission is to empower British Jews to support a political resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It says here, and I'm reading from the website, our focus is advocating for a resolution to the conflict, and we believe that only through a political resolution will Israel thrive and prosper, alongside a viable and independent Palestinian state. Yachad believes that the occupation, which denies millions of Palestinians their basic civil and political rights, must end if a resolution to the conflict is to be achieved. Now, it's a significant, Yachad is a significant voice within the mainstream British Jewish community, have thousands of supporters. Members on the board are of deputies of British Jews. They work closely with a variety of community bodies, civil society, political partners in Israel, and MPs across the political spectrum in the UK. I'm delighted to say that Hannah Weisfeld, the director of Yachad UK, joins me now. Hannah, thank you so much for your time. I had my eye on your organisation and wanted to speak with you for a very long time. It is such a difficult time. On one hand, Jewish people I know in the UK and definitely in the US are seeing yet another rise in I say yet another because I don't completely believe that it's gone away, in anti-Semitism. And we've also had Islamophobia on the rise. It's number one, let me ask after you, how are you during these really troubled times?
Thank you very much for having me on, and I have to say your pronunciation is perfect. I mean, it's hard. I think the British Jewish community is feeling very bruised. It's very mournful, and I think the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that the Jewish community is very small. It's at least 250,000 people in the UK, and the vast majority of people in this community have friends, family, often very close family in Israel. And there are a lot of people here who've been directly impacted or are only one person removed from someone who's been directly impacted from the terrorist attack on October the 7th. So the community is really reeling. And I think it's, you can't really overstate the kind of historical trauma that it brings up. So for lots of people, you look at the images and the pictures and the stories of Hamas terrorists tying up Jews, burning them to death in their homes. And it is hard not to be drawn back to pogroms in Eastern Europe and the Holocaust. Yeah. And so people are feeling, I think, historically traumatized by what's happened. That said, there is obviously now a war that is developed in the region in response, and it's much more complex when you come to talk about how people feel about what's actually happening now on the ground. So I think that you have simultaneously a real feeling of fear and people being in mourning, basically, and actually fear about the rise in anti-Semitism. And I think for the first time ever in my life, I feel relatively frightened, not in a really significant way, but I'm aware that it's not necessarily completely safe. And you have people now with their eyes turned, obviously, to the region and what's happening there, and very conflicted opinions about what is unraveling and what's happening to Gaza and how this war might end.
Because everybody seems to think that everybody who's Jewish thinks exactly the same way. Everybody who is Palestinian thinks exactly the same way. Goodies, baddies, black, white. It is. There are so many different colours and so many different thoughts. I've mentioned before on this program, I think it was 1973 when with my school, we stayed at a kibbutz just outside Haifa. And I remember even then, as these school kids, when the alarms went off and we were like, oh, and yet the young people our own age had a whole history already, had generational memories. That siren wasn't, it brought to mind a whole unspoken, visceral history. And I guess because I'm as old as I am, I can remember, again, these things rise up, fall. I mean, there's no feeling of safety. Is there ever going to be a feeling of safety both with Palestinians and both with Jewish people?
Well, look, I think the real tragedy here, and I think that this cannot be overstated enough, and I've said this now several times in different media interviews I've done, is that ultimately no Palestinian and no Israeli is going to be safe and secure without a political resolution to this conflict. And actually, the international community has completely failed the Israeli and the Palestinian people, because for 30 years, they've looked the other way. And so Israelis do things, and the Israeli government, successive Israeli governments have done plenty to entrench occupation and make it possible for there to be any kind of peaceful resolution. Israel's borders have remained insecure and frankly incredibly dangerous, which is what we've seen play out on October the 7th. And Israelis feel really terrified by that, and understandably so. And actually, the international community has basically said, well, it's not really our problem. When they do things that we don't agree with, we will issue a condemnation, we will issue a statement, and we'll condemn, and we'll make it clear what we think, but we're not going to take any action. We're not going to do anything really significant to bring this conflict to an end. It's too difficult. We'll invest too much political time, resource, energy. We won't get anything for that. And so we're just going to ignore it. And at great peril has it been ignored, because what you now see is international leaders literally running around the Middle East doing shuttle diplomacy, trying to prevent this from becoming a much, much worse conflict. If Iran involves Hezbollah from Lebanon, we will see an enormous outbreak of regional war, which will result in the deaths of many, many more people. And so it's my view that actually simultaneously to trying to end this immediate round of fighting, and basically to try and save as many lives as possible, in order to actually bring security for Israel and an independent, viable Palestinian state, there's got to be a political process. And there cannot be a return to October the 6th, which is a status quo that has resulted in a set of circumstances where this is almost inevitable. And that is not to say that the only way...
Sorry to interrupt there. Sorry to interrupt you, Hannah. Just for people who don't know, when you say it can't be returned to October the 6th, the situation there, are you talking about, some people have called Gaza the biggest open air prison, etc. Are you talking about the state of affairs that the day before this latest horror? A conflict that has resulted in Israel having no internationally recognized borders. So there is no clarity on what is Israel and what is not because of the occupied territories. Millions of Palestinians that live in Gaza and also the occupied territories without basic civil and political rights. And an international community that kind of has ignored that. And so the conflict has just been left. And, there isn't really, I talk about a status quo, but to be honest, there isn't really a status quo, because it's what a lot of our colleagues on the ground, the human rights community in Israel, call the status quo ante, which is that a terrible situation which is actually getting worse and worse and worse. And for months, the security services in Israel and the Israeli Defense Forces were warning that there was a very high chance that something very significant would happen. And unfortunately, those warnings turned out to be correct, because what happened on October the 6th, I think, was something that I've spent a lot of time on the Gaza border. So one of the things we do is take delegations of British Jews who want to understand more about the conflict out to the region. So we go to spend a lot of time in the occupied territories in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. You can't get into Gaza, so we will go to the Gaza border and we will visit the border. We will visit with human rights activists. We'll meet people who live on the border. And actually, the idea that over 1,500, they're saying up to 3,000 people potentially breached that border on October the 7th. You normally can't get anywhere near it. There was a very, very serious security and military failure of proportions that I don't think anyone could ever have imagined. And that is because the status quo and actually the situation with Israel's government, which was very distracted with internal issues inside Israel, meant that there was an opportunity basically for a terrorist militant organization that doesn't want to live in peace with Israel to exploit that situation. And that has dragged us now into the situation we're in. However, to actually get out of it, fundamentally, it's not going to be by military means. It can only be by a political resolution. And that work has got to start today. It can't start in 6 months' time, in a year's time, because it won't ever happen.
And so
that's what I was going to say. It's going to be interesting to see the speech. The Times of Israel has been saying that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is slated to hold a press conference at 6:30 p.m. UK time on the war against Hamas, marking the first time the Premier will answer reporters' questions since October the 7th. Which is going to be very, very telling. And also his words are going to have a very, very fast impact on what happens around the world, really, because you mentioned with his government and really having taken the eyes off the ball because, the internal workings and siding with the far right, etc. So did the United States, though, because of what's happening in Congress. They didn't have anybody in a Security Council at the time. Have they yet got an ambassador to Israel? I mean, there are so many countries, even the UK, with their own internal squabbles that a neglected situation was even more neglected.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And obviously we've had, Ukraine and Russia. The UK has been completely, attention has been completely elsewhere for a long time now because of Brexit. There have been the pandemic, obviously. There's been many, many other things to distract people. But I think unfortunately, the lesson that the world has learned this time around is that this conflict doesn't end at the borders of Israel and Gaza. The potential for this to spill over is so significant and so dangerous that it's incumbent upon everyone, not just for the sake of Israelis and Palestinians, but obviously primarily for their sake, but for the sake of the world, that we need to bring this conflict to an end. And I would add that actually there is real potential in the Middle East. In the last few years, there has been I'm not sure if you can call it a peace accord, but there's been agreements between Israel and the wider Arab world.
Do you think in many ways that as far as Hamas is concerned, that was, if you like, the touch paper because of those, even Qatar, although it's double-handed because they're members of Hamas there, but it's also been a negotiator with Israel and Saudi Arabia. That would be, it always is very, if you like, how can I put that, frightening for an organization that might not want that any dialogue or cohesiveness to happen between traditional enemies, if you like.
Yeah, I think that's an absolute driver for them, which is that you see, discussion of a potential accord between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which would have been inconceivable a few years ago, and it's been with Morocco, it's been with the UAE. There is this kind of sense of Israel. This, I guess, the recognition of Israel is here to stay, and actually, it's to our benefit to have a working relationship with the state of Israel. And and the way in which relations were playing out in the Middle East prior to October the 7th was, in spite of the Israel-Palestine conflict, we're going to build those relations, whereas previously, the understanding was that Israel would never be part of the broader Middle East without there being a resolution to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian people. And without a shadow of a doubt, one of Hamas's motivations was to smash that because it was dangerous for them. But I think that in itself is really important, which is that if there is a chance, and I think there's a big question on the if, that those conversations restart between Israel and the surrounding, broader Middle East, it cannot be done any longer at the expense of the Palestinian people. They cannot be excluded from them. They cannot be put to the side because we have to resolve the conflict. And if the Palestinians are written out of those discussions, there are too many reasons for actors, within Palestinian society to try and spoil those chances. And for the vast majority of people, what they really want to do is live in peace and security. Yeah. And in order to do that, you fundamentally have to give people their basic rights. You cannot live in peace and security where you have a group of people that do not have their basic political and civil rights. And it's going to be much, much harder now because the trust is much lower than it was. Yeah. I think that it will partly depend on what happens to this Israeli government, which I don't think will survive. I don't see how it can. It may survive the war, but it certainly won't survive long term because Netanyahu is considered to be largely responsible for the failure. Who comes in afterwards, what they then choose to do, and I think largely what the Americans choose to do, which will partly depend on the American election, will be key in what happens next.
Very, very scary times. And Hannah, I do thank you so much for speaking with us today. And I'm sure we'll speak with you again. Hannah Weisfeld, there, Director of Yachad UK.